Welcome to the Walter Cronkite Awards for Excellence in Television Political Journalism. We wanted to go back to the National Press Club to give out the 2021 trophies, but the pandemic nixed that. So this year, like pretty much everything else, we've gone virtual. I'm Marty Kaplan. On behalf of the Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism at the University of Southern California, welcome to the 11th biennial Cronkite Awards. At Annenberg, I'm privileged to hold the Norman Lear Chair and to direct the Norman Lear Center, which has administered these awards since their start in 2001. Speaking of Norman Lear, Norman, are you watching?
Are you kidding? Of course I'm watching.
So, Norman, do you remember the first Walter Cronkite Awards?
That was a long time ago, but it's amazing how keen Walter Cronkite is in my memory. The newscaster of my lifetime. If I had to pick one, it's undoubtedly Walter Cronkite.
And that night he attracted the cream of Washington.
Yes, our good friends Ben Bradley, Sally Quinn were there.
It was great, and black tie to boot.
Yep. That's when I had a black tie.
Well, this year, all we have is a computer screen, but I hope you will be watching. Can we come back to you at the end and ask you what you thought?
Of course. You bet I'll be watching.
Terrific. Thank you. See you in a bit.
Bye.
So, why these awards? When Walter Cronkite anchored the CBS Evening News, a poll memorably called him the most trusted man in America. In 1968, Cronkite went to Vietnam to see if the U.S. government was telling the truth to Americans about winning the war. His answer, no, was an inflection point in journalism, in politics, and in history. In Cronkite's time, it took courage to tell the truth and report the reality of the Vietnam War. In our time, it takes courage to believe in truth and call a big lie a big lie. It now takes courage to report that reality really exists and that injustice does not just fall from the sky. Explaining why he gave his name to this award, Cronkite said this.
We are not intelligent enough, we're not educated well enough to perform the necessary act of selecting our leaders for the future. We've got to improve that situation, and it's going to be, to a large degree, up to us in television and radio, in broadcasting, to get that job done. If we fail at that, our democracy, our republic, is, I think, in serious danger.
Prophetic words. Our democracy, our republic is, I think, in serious danger. Today, we honor journalists who don't flinch from that danger. We applaud stations and networks who give those journalists the resources they need to do their jobs. And we hope that more journalists and future journalists will be inspired by their example. This year, for the first time, entries for the Cronkite Awards were limited to 3 topics: systemic racism, the integrity of elections, and the coronavirus pandemic. 177 entries, a record, were submitted. Today, we spotlight the 7 that won. We honor journalists who ask what police reform could look like in Newark, New Jersey, and who tell us what it means to be Black in Arizona. We laud a reporter who exposed how the Postal Service made it harder to vote in Montana. We pay tribute to correspondents and producers who tracked the coronavirus outbreak and shutdown in Wuhan, who witnessed heroism and heartbreak in a Bronx hospital, who fight for Wisconsinites whose safety net has failed them. And we salute a medical correspondent, a doctor, who counters misinformation, disinformation, and conspiracies with science and reason and knowledge. It's no small thing to watch 177 entries. Fortunately, we had some great help. The screeners who shortlisted our finalists were Annenberg faculty and alumni, award-winning reporters, producers, documentary makers, and educators. Then a dozen judges, faculty, alumni, and news industry veterans chose the winners. I'm delighted today to be joined by 6 of those judges, all members of our faculty, to present the awards. To start us off, presenting the Cronkite Award for network coverage of systemic racism is my Annenberg colleague, Professor Mark Lloyd.
Thank you, Marty. I'm Mark Lloyd, Clinical Professor of Communication at the Annenberg School of Communication and Journalism. I am here to present the Walter Cronkite Award for network coverage of systemic racism to PBS Frontline for Policing the Police 2020, a documentary about Newark's half-decade struggle to fix the relationship between the police department and its Black residents. Judges hailed the work of correspondent Jelani Cobb and filmmakers James Jacoby and Anya Borg as thoughtful, balanced, and inspiring. What this story does beautifully is illuminate, judges said, shedding light on police reform without drama or hyperbole, using a story of abuse and intolerance to bring a sense of calm and search for solutions, not only for policing, but also for education, housing, healthcare, and other systems permeated by racial inequality. Let's have a look.
We're gonna start splitting up this side of the street, the other side of the street.
The Newark Street Team has grown to a 50-person organization.
This is our 1-800 number if you see something transpiring.
It's become an important part of the city's overall approach to use community interventions instead of police to reduce violence. In July, we met up with street team workers in the South Ward. Talk to me a little bit about what's happening here and why the street team is walking down Brookdale Street.
Yeah, so July 4th weekend, we had a double homicide on this block.
Wow.
You know, we talked directly to the family members who've been impacted. And if there is plan for retaliation, that we convince them not to retaliate. We always say that we cannot stop the first bullet, but we sure can stop the second, the third, and fourth one.
We coming to you live near Dayton with North Community Street Team.
This is one of the areas that's called our hot spot.
We just want to touch everybody. If you need any services, we here.
Find us on our Facebook, like our page.
The street team is also trained to answer distress calls. They're stationed outside of the city's schools. And they're embedded in the hospital to help victims and perpetrators of violence with social, legal, and psychological services.
We're trying to introduce more alternative ways for people to actually address their trauma. You got all of the violence that has happened over the years, multi-generational trauma. I'm like, you have young guys here, man. I'm like, it was astounding, brother, that most of the people on my team had been shot. Male and female. And their parents were shot, and their parents' parents were shot,
Accepting the award for PBS's Frontlines, Policing the Police 2020 is correspondent Jelani Cobb.
Thank you to the Cronkite Awards Committee and to the Annenberg School of Communications for recognizing our film with this award. This project was conceived of and created in the midst of a pandemic that complicated every step of the creative process, and every member of our team went above and beyond because they felt that this story was important enough to warrant the risks inherent in telling it. I'd like to thank our producers, Anya Borg, James Jacoby, and Megan Robertson, our editor, Pierre Takal, Jeremy Gould, our cameraman, senior producer, Frank Kewen, and of course, Andrew Metz, Frontline's managing editor, and Rainey Aronson Rath, the executive producer of Frontline, who was involved in every aspect of this process. A special shout out goes to our associate producer, Joshua Nehemiah Bester, and the whole team at Frontline. It means a great deal for our film to be associated with the legacy of commitment and integrity that Walter Cronkite exemplified, particularly in a moment when the very ideas of facts and truths are under attack. A little more than a year ago, we, along with millions of other people in this country and around the world, became reluctant witnesses to the last moments of George Floyd, an American citizen whose life was extinguished in the most casually brutal way imaginable. Of the many divides in this nation, we were introduced to a most fundamental one, the division between those who knew we lived in a country where such a thing is possible, and those for whom this video of Mr. Floyd's death was an introduction to that fact. The shock of that moment yielded promises of change and introspection, some, but not all of them, sincere. We've seen some efforts at change, but distressingly, we've also seen recalcitrant efforts to stymie it. As we speak, we are mired in useless, bad faith debates about critical race theory and disputes about the validity of the term systemic racism. But each of our cornerstone institutions in American life, our housing sector, our employment sector, our educational and healthcare systems, yield disparate outcomes that stubbornly correlate to race. This is a fact. This is the truth. Our film explored one city and the fraught relationship of one system, policing, and the legacy of bias that it is trying to escape. We told this story because we believed Newark could serve as a microcosm of a problem that is fundamental to this society. We were not naive enough to believe that a single film could resolve this problem. But as James Baldwin observed, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. I think I can speak for our whole team when I say that if we have helped ourselves collectively face this problem, then in some measure we have achieved what we set out to do. Thank you again to the Cronkite Awards.
I had a chance to talk with Jelani Cobb about his documentary and covering systemic racism. The full conversation is online at cronkiteawards.org. Here's a clip from that.
I think that a lot of things could have happened in Minneapolis. Minneapolis had a lot of chances to get this right before May 25th of last year. And, what I mean by that is, there was, Philando Castile, who was killed, in the car after he told an officer that he was a licensed carrier of a firearm. And that happened just outside Minneapolis, in a suburb of Minneapolis. There was Justine Demond, who was killed by Muhammad Noor, a police officer in Minneapolis before that. There was the Jamar Clark incident. He was killed by a police officer, and there were disputes about whether he was handcuffed at the time or not. But it was, a huge controversy. There have been multiple cases in which the MPD had a chance to revisit and review what they were doing and to take a move in a different direction. None of that happened, and the death of George Floyd was the culmination of that. The other thing that I think is important, something that hasn't been talked about as much in that case, was the fact that Derek Chauvin was a 19-year veteran of the police department. And so when people began to kind of make the argument that he was an isolated problem, there wasn't a systemic concern, the problem is that this person could have all these kinds of traits and all these characteristics and still be in that police department for 19 years and not be rooted out. And so it does point to a kind of systemic concern there.
So one of the other interesting things that you did with the documentary was, I think it was the drive along with, I think these were like Black and Latino officers in Newark, which suggests that part of the problem that you were highlighting about police brutality was not simply the problem of white officers, that this was a problem about something else. I mean, am I making sense? Do you know what I'm referring to?
I mean, so in Newark, what happened in 1967 when Newark had that huge uprising, as a result of a Black cab driver being beaten by white police officers. And, the riot that lasted 5 days in the city, it kind of marked the city's history. And one of the things that came out of the report that was issued was that the police department needed to diversify. They needed to have more Black officers on the force and more Latino officers on the force. Well, now Newark has a majority minority police department, but they still have some of the same problems. And, that's not to say that there's not a racial implication to this. When I talked to the mayor about that, I said up front, look, you have a majority minority police department. Can you say these problems are a matter of race? And he said, yes, because the question is not who's doing it. The question is who is on the receiving end of it.
Thank you, Jelani. Congratulations again to the PBS Frontline team. And now, to present the award for coverage of systemic racism by a local station is my colleague on the Cronkite jury and Annenberg faculty, Professor Willa Seidenberg.
I'm Willa Seidenberg, Professor of Professional Practice at USC School of Journalism. The 2021 Cronkite Award for coverage of systemic racism by a local station goes to 12 News on KPNX in Phoenix. This NBC affiliate produced a documentary called The Work is Hard and Not Done, Being Black in the Valley. The jury applauded this TEGNA-owned station for its use of highly compelling archival footage that provided a historical perspective on racism in Arizona over the last century. The judges commented that every interview with experts, community leaders, and residents carried so much emotion. The past and present are seamlessly strung together into an impactful narrative that's not broadly known. It makes you realize how much has changed, and more importantly, how much more needs to be done. Let's watch a clip.
Anger. That's how I process it. And let me explain. There are no more words for it. It happens far too frequently in this country. And I think of each of those people as, wow, that could have been my family. Could have been my brother. Could have been my husband. Could have been my cousin. It's not right that as African Americans, we have to live in the greatest country on the planet and fear our own law enforcement that pledge to protect and to serve. But we realize they're protecting and serving maybe somebody else, but it doesn't always feel like it's us. I look at these stories over and over again, and I'm like, what could the officer have been thinking? And it's always easy to armchair quarterback. But if they're running away from you and they don't have a deadly weapon, how are they a threat again?
Accepting the award is 12 News anchor Caribe Devine.
I was born in East Texas, and as a biracial kid, it didn't take me long to see that the world treated those who look like me and my family differently than it did some others. It became part of my history and in many ways shaping who I am and how I look at the world. When our station set out to make The Work is Hard and Not Done, Being Black in the Valley, we wanted to look at how Arizona's past had shaped its present, because the present often hides what happened in the past. Last summer, the nation was convulsing. The name George Floyd was heard in every conversation. And at around the same time, here in Phoenix, a black man named Deon Johnson had been shot by a police officer while sitting in his car. The two cases weren't all that similar in details, but close enough that the anger and sadness and cries for justice about one situation blended into the other. So now Phoenix was convulsing. Protesters took to the streets, clashing with police. Arrests were made, and we documented the whole thing in real time. But we struggled as a station to try to help our audience understand the news's place in history. How did all of this relate to us and to the Valley? Our staff had Zoom meetings that became emotional at times. My coworkers shared candid stories about the talk, that conversation that Black parents have with their kids about the dangers that they might face in life just because of the color of their skin. We learned that our very own sports anchor had guns drawn on him by police while at a gas station just hours after doing a newscast. We talked about history, about how even though Phoenix is 1,661 miles away from Selma, Alabama, it had its own ugly racial history. And the more we looked, the more we saw that the past wasn't all that different from the present. That an incident in 1941 where police went into a black neighborhood and started machine gunning homes while looking for a felon was not in principle all that different from a SWAT team bursting into Breonna Taylor's home. And that the sit-ins in downtown Phoenix in the 1960s weren't that different from the protests right outside the Phoenix Police Department in 2020. So we wrote about history. We tried to make it come alive by connecting it to modern events and contemporary figures, pastors, lawyers, teenagers, historians. We wanted testimony, people who could take history with a capital H and relate it to their own history, people who lived the hidden past and now shaped the present. I am honored to accept this award on behalf of all of the people at 12 News who worked so hard on this project, and grateful for all of the people who let us into their lives to discover their hidden histories.
I had an opportunity to speak with Judd Slifka, Director of Digital Content at KPNX, about the station's coverage of systemic racism in Arizona. You can watch the full interview at cronkiteawards.org. Here's a clip from it. I thought that the historic part of it was so interesting because I'm sure that not a lot of people knew about the background of the African American community in Phoenix. Were there things that came out in the course of doing the documentary that either surprised you or any of your staff, or that people made realizations that maybe they hadn't had before?
Yeah. Phoenix is the place that builds over its history constantly. Phoenix was founded on a series of ancient native canals that former Confederates turned into irrigation canals. And the city constantly reinvents itself and regenerates itself. And so I think everyone has forgotten, or many people have forgotten, all of these, these events. This is a place with a very transient population base. I think the statistic is, 3 people come in, 2 people leave every day. There's So everything becomes surprising. And so when you start talking about the influence of the Klan and the power structure, yeah, a lot of people say, I had no idea. And then when we got to the 1942 soldier riots at Papago Park, where MPs are machine gunning houses, that is probably the single most commented upon historical thing that we found.
Wow.
Is that, here's this thing, what do you mean they went into neighborhoods and did this? So I think I think you expect sit-ins, like if you have a rudimentary knowledge of history, like you expect sit-ins to happen in a city like Phoenix. You expect that some of the project fires of the late 1960s that happened here, would have happened here. If the Martin Luther King thing becomes a defining moment for Arizona for a decade and a half. So you sort of are aware of that if you've lived here, but the further you go back, at one point, the Ku Klux Klan had the county attorney and the county sheriff were both Klan members. But that's the 1920s, and no one here remembers the 1920s because we built over it and the city has regenerated over that period.
Thank you, Judd, and congratulations. I now turn it over to my friend and colleague, Judy Muller, who'll present the award for network coverage of the pandemic. Judy?
Thank you, Willa. I'm Judy Muller, Professor Emerita at the Annenberg School of Journalism. For network coverage of the coronavirus pandemic, we actually have two Cronkite winners. The first is CNN's coverage of the coronavirus outbreak in China. David Culver's reporting was among the first to emerge from Wuhan before the outbreak was declared a pandemic. The 24 hours that Culver, producer Yang Xiong, and photojournalist Natalie Thomas spent in Wuhan on the eve of lockdown provided essential contacts for months of reporting from Beijing, starting with a 2-week quarantine. They were the only foreign TV network team to speak with whistleblower Dr. Li Wenliang. 2 weeks later, Culver was live on the air to report news of Li's death when that news broke. The jury recognized CNN's exceptional real-time access. They were right where and when they should have been. Let's watch a clip.
Just stepped aboard a train leaving Beijing. We're headed to Wuhan. That's considered the ground zero of this coronavirus.
Concerns over the spread of deadly illness are rising. As soon as we boarded the train from Beijing, most faces covered. Just about everyone traveling home for the Lunar New Year. Strict screening upon arrival. One by one, passengers step through a thermometer check to make sure they are not bringing a fever with them.
Typically, coronavirus symptoms include a cough, possibly fever, which can last for several days. For those with a weakened immune system, there's a chance the virus could cause a much more serious respiratory tract illness like pneumonia or bronchitis.
Health officials now believe the Wuhan coronavirus can be transmitted from one person to another. Face masks are spiking in demand, so much so that a search through Chinese online retailers shows some stores are running low and several more are sold out.
So this is where authorities believe the source of the coronavirus is. It's the wildlife and seafood market. And you can perhaps see over there, it's cordoned off. You've got police at all the corners.
It is so sensitive that within minutes of us arriving and recording, security asked us to stop filming.
So police just asked us to leave the market area. They said we have to get official permission, and once we get that permission, we can come back. The reality is we won't be granted that permission. So instead, we're able to drive now through it, but you can see they've closed off the entire market area is going on. No business whatsoever. It's just empty.
Accepting the award, CNN's David Culver.
A strange irony in that if it were not for this outbreak, we'd likely be gathered in person for this event. And yet, if it were not for this outbreak, my team and I would not have been recognized with this incredible honor. Amidst a still uncertain time, it's humbling and comforting. And it makes being so far from family and friends back in the U.S. a bit more palatable. I'm the one accepting this award, but it must be stressed our work in Wuhan, hours before the lockdown, and subsequent reporting from quarantine in Beijing and here in Shanghai would not have been possible without the tireless hours put in by my CNN team, particularly producer Yong Shong and photojournalist Natalie Thomas. It is thanks to their efforts and determination we were able to share with the world a glimpse of what was then a mysterious illness on the brink of becoming this historic pandemic. Thank you for this award.
I had a chance to talk with David about covering the pandemic's early days in China. The full interview is online at cronkiteawards.org. Here's a clip.
And so early on, we started to see in Chinese local media reports about Dr. Li and what he was going through. And it was on my team, Yong and Natalie, who in the midst of our quarantine, which was not, by the way, part of government policy at that point, it was our CNN leadership saying, we think you need to do 14 days away from everyone else, keep to yourselves, and do that in a hotel. Don't let anyone in or out of the room. And that's what we did. We decided to also make that an opportunity to news gather. And so it was at all hours. And Yong found a contact for Dr. Li, first started messaging him, said, are you available to talk? When he pulled him up on the phone, the only thing we could really hear in the midst of a few words was heavy breathing and a lot of coughing. And so we recorded what we could from that. The next step was Yong continuing a conversation with him via WeChat messages. And he was incredibly frank about what he was going through, what his efforts were in trying to sound the alarm. He really didn't want to make a big deal about it. He was just telling friends and family, hey, there's something going around. You should be aware of this. That was screenshotted. That went viral, and that got him in a lot of trouble. And he showed us even the paperwork he had to sign to say to local police, he will stop spreading rumors about what was happening there. And when Yong made contact with him, you know, there's always a professional relationship, but at the same time, here was a guy 34 years old who was conveying all he was doing in that moment as he was clinging to life at the same time to try to save other lives. And when we finally were able to air his story, we were the first foreign TV network to have been in touch with him. 6 days later, we find out that he passes away and that he dies from this disease. And so it was really a remarkable experience, but at the same time, on a personal level, I think it impacted us all quite deeply.
Is there a question that you wished you'd asked him?
I don't know if there's so much a question that I would have wanted to ask him, but rather I would have liked to have met him in person, to be honest. I would have wanted to see this individual who was really just a man who served as a doctor, and really that's all he wanted to do, and was expecting a child, and his young wife was at home waiting for him. And ultimately, you know, here was a guy who was told to go back to work, and it was going back to work in the hospital that he contracts this disease, even transmits it to his own parents, who fortunately survived, but it took his own life. So I don't know a question so much, Judy, as I would have liked to met the guy.
Thanks, David, and congratulations again to you and your CNN team. Presenting the other network award for pandemic coverage is my colleague, Gordon Stables.
Thanks, Judy. I'm Gordon Stables, director of the Annenberg School of Journalism. CBS News wins a Cronkite Award for bravery and hope, 7 days on the front line. Judges lauded this harrowing documentary about a Bronx hospital at the pandemic's epicenter as moving and at times heartbreaking, a first draft of history, and an extraordinary public service. CBS News veterans Guy Campanile and Mitch Weitzner secured remarkable access for Campanile and CBS News producers Andrew Bast, Sean Herbert, and Gilad Thaler. At immense personal risk, they let ER and critical care workers, patients, and loved ones tell their stories without a correspondent or narration, and capturing their dedication, the horror, and their exhaustion, and cut through the fog of misinformation and disinformation. Let's watch.
We're sitting right here in the command center.
752C.
We built this basically within 2 weeks' time to be able to provide some kind of resource to all of the critically ill patients throughout the hospital.
I have the medicine bag. Where's the code? Okay.
The pandemic has challenged all of us. There are more patients who are critically ill, on ventilators,
Give me a second by car.
with multiple organ failures than has ever been seen before.
I moved up to 449. 449? 449.
I have profound respect for my colleagues. They're the ones who are there every day on the front lines, going in those rooms with the patients.
Let me just see.
They're the ones who are taking the biggest risk. We're all vulnerable. Any of us can get it.
I would like to introduce myself. I'm Dr. BADILLO. A lot of the patients, when we come to them, we're wearing this whole outfit. It could be a little scary. So someone thought of the idea that if we had our pictures next to our name, they could see a friendly smile and let them see that we're real people who care about them and want to take good care of them. So what happened? What made you come to the hospital today?
I came in here. I feel so sick.
You felt so sick.
I can't breathe.
You can't breathe. Many patients don't just come in with shortness of breath. They don't come in with the classic cough. It's very insidious how it presents itself. Is there someone you want to call? I could put them on FaceTime on my phone, and you could talk to someone if you want.
Accepting for the CBS News team, co-executive producer Guy Campanile.
On behalf of the entire CBS News team behind Bravery and Hope, 7 days in the front line, I wish to extend our sincerest gratitude to the judges who recognized our work with the Cronkite Award. There were two things that we ached to do when we set off on this project. The first is to get through it without anyone getting sick, and somehow fortune smiled on us, and none of our brave producers and technicians who spent a week in the epicenter of the COVID outbreak last year contracted the disease. The second thing that we hoped above all was to reveal the truth about just how devastating and horrific this disease was. At the time, it struck us that many in the media and in the White House were still saying that the disease was a hoax, that COVID-19 would pass quickly, that there was nothing to worry about. And that was the driving motivation to take the risk that our people did, to spend a week in Montefiore Hospital with doctors and nurses on the front lines, bringing to our viewers unvarnished truth, something Walter Cronkite did every night of the week on the CBS Evening News. You know, there still are some of us at CBS News who knew Walter. I didn't know him well, but I follow, and my colleagues follow his example each and every day. We're proud to be part of CBS News. We're proud to follow in Walter Cronkite's footsteps, and we're most proud of being recognized with this Cronkite Award. Thank you.
I was able to speak with co-executive producers Guy Campanile and Mitch Weitzner about their documentary. Our conversation is online at cronkiteawards.com, and here's a clip.
Given everything Guy just said and the tremendous risk they undertook, in the same way it would have been easy for the hospital, Montefiore, to say, let's not do this, it would have been pretty easy for CBS News to say, maybe we shouldn't do this. Let's just give hospital personnel some cameras and we'll take the footage back and make a program out of it. But we had tremendous backing and support from the beginning from our boss, Susan Zirinsky, who of course is not just, was not just an executive and president of the news division, but also a deeply experienced producer. And there was faith on her part and confidence and encouragement on her part to have us do this, to take a calculated risk. And it was very fraught, and there were a lot of conversations, but she gave us the green light, and she's a big part of the reason why it all worked.
Thank you, Mitch. That's a great reference because that obvious, so that you have the footage, you completed the program, and Guy, thankfully, to your point, that it seems like from the information that we have, the team came out of it and we're in good shape from that experience. When you start seeing this compiled work and going through the editing and the review of it, from a jury now, it's striking in its urgency. It's striking in the humanity and the reaction. Mitch, I'm curious for your team and the kind of the folks that were watching this being edited and put together, did you have that same sense of this is something truly remarkable that we'll be looking at years from now?
I was gripped by it every day. I had a little bit of distance, a little bit of fresh eyes. Guy and the rest of the team were inside the hospital, living this all day. And I had the benefit from the armchair of sitting back and watching it come in. And I found it staggering. We, you know, as news producers, as journalists, you always want that unfiltered view. You don't want the public affairs staff hovering over you, limiting what you can see. And we found them tremendously agreeable. As long as we respected patients' privacy and stayed out of the doctor's way, what I saw of Guy and the rest of our team that was inside the hospital is that they were given tremendous latitude to move about, to film respectfully. And so we had that real cinema verite, that fly on the wall experience in the most intense moments, in the most dramatic instances, watching the doctors and nurses themselves try and figure out this mysterious virus. And it was fascinating.
Thank you, Guy and Mitch, and congratulations to the CBS News team again. And now, to present the Cronkite Award for pandemic coverage by a local news station is my Annenberg colleague, Rebecca Haggerty.
Thank you, Gordon. I'm Rebecca Haggerty, Associate Professor of Professional Practice at the Annenberg School. I'm here to present the award for local pandemic coverage to Milwaukee, Wisconsin's TMJ4. Wisconsin's pandemic shutdown brought its dangerously outdated unemployment system to the breaking point, failing thousands of people, some of whom became homeless while waiting for benefits. The Scripps-owned NBC affiliate used social and broadcast media for struggling Wisconsinites to tell their own stories, and the station and its nonprofit partner, Wisconsin Watch, to hold government's feet to the fire, helping citizens collect hundreds of thousands of dollars in unemployment back pay. The jury commended the TMJ4I team's great storytelling and selfless tenacity as a great example of journalism as a public service. Let's take a look.
They said everything would probably go through.
Harry Sir's job at a public pool in Cedarburg ended in June.
It just says that it's being processed.
It wasn't until September that someone answered her calls. They told her there was a mistake on her claim, but now it's fixed. They just have to process it.
Processing takes less than 2 weeks. Normally, it has now been 8 weeks since that message has been posted.
While she fought to get any answers from the state, Sir found out the ovarian cancer she successfully beat 2 years ago returned.
So as you're battling cancer, you are trying to get your money from the DWD.
That's been the difficult part because I had to borrow money from family just to pay my own health insurance to make sure that I was covered for all these cancer treatments.
Sir is not alone.
Everybody just tells me it's been assigned. It's been assigned to somebody. They're looking at it.
I've called more than 80 times.
We're presently on food stamps.
When the order to stay at home came in March, hundreds of thousands of people in Wisconsin lost their jobs, many for the first time. From March 15th to June 30th, more than 781,000 Wisconsinites applied for unemployment. That's more than 11 times the number that filed in that stretch in 2019. The unemployment system began to crumble as the pandemic worsened. Emails obtained by Wisconsin Watch through an open records request show the urgency and concern within the DWD. The day after the governor's Safer at Home order went into effect, DWD spokesperson Ben Jed wrote, quote, "We are getting more and more questions and negative comments on Facebook and Twitter." Later that day, then Secretary Caleb Frostman wrote, quote, "We are getting inundated with press inquiries about the long wait times, and we can only keep the negative press at bay for so long." He added, quote, "We have to find a way to get more answers to more people."
Accepting for TMJ4 is reporter Kristen Byrne, photojournalist Tamott Wolverton, and producer Marty Hobie.
We want to thank the Norman Lear Center, USC Annenberg, the Cronkite judges, our parent company EW Scripps, the leadership and staff at our station TMJ4 News, and most importantly, the viewers who trusted us to tell their stories. You may be wondering, why are we in this day room? Well, we're here because 8 months ago, Tamott, Marty, and myself, we connected virtually with dozens of Wisconsinites struggling to get their unemployment benefits. They were at the end of their rope. And they trusted us to tell their stories. We started and were committed to telling unemployment problems and problems they were having with unemployment at the start of the pandemic. And several months in, we were able to help a couple people get thousands of dollars of their benefit money. And in that story, we asked others, hey, if you're struggling, email us. We want to help. The emails came in and they haven't stopped.
So as a photojournalist, this was kind of a tricky story to tell. We're in a pandemic and everything went virtual. So this was the first time in all of our careers that we had to figure out a way to connect with individuals all over the state of Wisconsin. So they trusted us to tell their stories as to what their struggles were, because we physically couldn't go into their homes, so we had to do it over the computer, which was a challenge at times because the signal would drop, audio wouldn't be there, there were delays, but people still, they came back. They didn't quit, they came back because they wanted to share their story with us. And we made it happen, and I think it made us all aware that this could happen to anybody, and that's what kind of made it hit home when we looked at the faces out there, and we called it faces of unemployment, because that's what it looked like, So we thank everybody for sharing, their stories with us.
Yeah, we also want to thank, we partnered with the Wisconsin Center for Investigative Journalism on this project. If you can believe, this actually started as a project looking into overtime hours at the department, and it just kind of exploded into the year-long research and investigative project it became. So specifically Jim Malowitz, Bram Sablesmith for their help, their reporting and editing, and just the collaboration really showed that long-form journalism is still very much needed in today's society, and is still possible in the days of tight and daily deadlines. So again, we want to thank the Norman Lear Center, USC Annenberg, and the judges again for this wonderful honor. This is certainly we're all going to cherish for the rest of our careers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
I spoke with TMJ4's Kristen Byrne and Marty Hobie about the station's efforts to hold the state of Wisconsin accountable. You can watch the full conversation at cronkiteawards.org. Here's a clip.
It started just on doing one or two stories with a couple of people and helping them get their benefit money. And one story in particular we aired months into the pandemic. We were able to get thousands of dollars for two Wisconsinites who were unemployed and deservedly needed their benefit money. Once we did that story, we asked others to email us if they had been waiting months as well. And boy, those emails came in, and we still get them to this day. Even yesterday, we got a few with people needing help.
And I think too, just like everyone else, our newsroom and our investigative unit was transitioning from into a pandemic workflow. Our assignment desk will tell you they've never received more calls about a single topic in their professional careers, and that people reaching out to the station on social media, calling in, emailing us, emailing anyone, including our front desk and sales staff at times, of just looking for help. So it was, through this, we were able to kind of create a database of people who reached out to us, people we reached out to, if we sent their information to the state, and if we were successful in helping them access their benefits. And as we were doing this, we were also trying to learn about this system. This was something neither of us really covered extensively before. So it was becoming familiar with the subject matter and becoming experts in it virtually in a matter of weeks.
Wow. And can you talk a little bit about what you're describing is a story that really connected with an audience? And I wonder if you can just talk about how important local news is, right? We've had a lot of bad, there just seems to be a continuous stream of, just difficulties, right, that local news outlets are facing all around the country. And I wonder, how do you feel about the role that your station is playing in the community?
I think it was really neat. We were committed at first to covering it, and sort of we thought, we can help a few people, that'd be great. And then when it turned into this sort of act of public service, I think it really became something where we felt compassion for these people, because we saw that this could have happened to us too. And I think that resonates with people.
There were artists, teachers, business people, contractors, regular people who one day worked and got a paycheck, the next day had nothing. And to a point where you think, oh, you have a little bit in savings and stuff like that. It went like this. And these people said, I've reached out to the governor's office. I've reached out to lawmakers. We were the only ones sort of getting back to them in a timely fashion saying, okay, let's try to help you. What can we do? And I think the compassion element of journalism, as you mentioned, media quite often has been under the attack. And I feel like this just shows how important just the humanity and compassion that's really needed in journalism.
Thanks, Kristen and Marty, and congratulations. I'll now turn it over to my colleague, Stacy Shoulder, who will present the award in the category of election integrity.
Thanks, Rebecca. I'm Stacy Shoulder, USC Annenberg professor and director of Annenberg Television News. I'm here to present the award for outstanding local news reporting on the integrity of the 2020 presidential election. The award goes to Maritsa Georgiou of NBC Montana for her reporting on the removal of blue mailboxes across the state by the U.S. Postal Service. In a pandemic election year particularly reliant on voting by mail, the U.S. Postmaster General implemented nationwide policies whose effect was to gum up and slow down mail delivery. The Cronkite judges said that when he put those measures on hold, Maritsa Georgiou clearly had a hand in it. Her dogged reporting for this Sinclair-owned station broke the story of mailbox removal in Montana, especially in Democratic areas. The judges said, quote, she shined a light on practices that could have disenfranchised Montanans. Her reporting rippled across the country, prompting more coverage and ultimately bringing about change. Let's watch a clip of Maritsa Georgiou's reporting.
A new twist as we work for you, uncovering what's really going on at the U.S. Postal Service. And last week, we helped break the story about Montana collection boxes and sorting machines taken offline. And now we've got new photos to back up what sources are telling us. NBC Montana's Maritsa Georgiou gets us up to speed.
Yeah, we have newly leaked photos of dismantled USPS machines in Montana. A postal worker who wants to stay anonymous says this is a disassembled DBCS sorting machine in a Montana USPS plant. They say the stackers are waiting to be sent to other facilities. My source says this photo is a disassembled AFCS 100 in Missoula that is being discarded. It basically cancels stamps and faces mail. And they say they're supposed to get an upgrade, but it's unclear when. And they worry their remaining machine will go down before that comes. There have been mixed reports on whether these machines or any removed blue collection boxes will be put back. As far as those boxes, this isn't the first time they've been removed. I found this article from 2009 in the Washington Post, which said 200,000 boxes had been removed since 1989. It said they were underperforming and received fewer than 25 pieces of mail each day. That's what the USPS said about the latest round of planned removals. But remember on Monday when we showed you these Missoula documents questioning the density tests that determine how much mail goes through a box. A postal carrier said they were told not to count all the mail during a test and showed proof that several boxes did not meet the USPS threshold for removal. And scammers got to work quickly on this. The reason I found that Washington Post article is because a picture from it was ripped off for this Craigslist post in Bozeman, offering one of the recently removed Montana blue boxes up for $50, an extra 10 for delivery. So again, I reached out to reps with the USPS for comment on all of this and heard back Thursday afternoon saying they can't comment in light of the Postmaster General's testimony before Congress in the next week. Reporting in Missoula, Maritsa Georgiou, NBC Montana.
Here is Maritsa Georgiou accepting her award.
It's quite something as a broadcast journalist to see your name in the same sentence as Walter Cronkite's and to also see it on this list of other outstanding recipients who I admire. It feels incredibly humbling because as honored as I am to receive this award, it doesn't really feel like it's my name that belongs here. For starters, I am quite certain I would not be here without Rachel Maddow and everyone else who amplified this story's reach. I want to personally thank Rachel for sharing this story on Twitter early that day, expanding that reach across the country, helping to put pressure on the USPS to put a hold on this policy. I also need to thank Montana's congressional delegation, which unanimously stepped up to write letters. But this really belongs to the brave postal union leaders who risked their livelihoods to leak me the documents needed to make this story what it became. They're the heroes in this, sharing the addresses, lists, and even photos of disassembled sorting machines. If I could somehow physically share this award with them, I would. In a year when it was easy to feel inadequate, burned out, and isolated, this story reminded me just how important our work is, especially at the local level. And it was an example that illustrated, yes, Twitter can actually be used for good and not evil. I never knew my tweets that day would become what they did, but it was because of the growing audience of people sharing real-time feedback, encouragement, and questions that pushed me to keep going, keep digging, keep sharing, because it was a reminder that our work really does matter and can be a catalyst for dramatic change. I was raised by a mother who taught me to stand up against injustice and inequities when I see them, and to look for ways to make a difference and find solutions. It's that kind of public service journalism that gets me out of bed in the morning, and I'm so thankful for the privilege of doing this every single day. I want to thank my mom, my loving and supportive husband and son who put up with my just terrible schedule and constant phone use. I also want to thank the Norman Lear Center at the USC Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism, the incredible journalism program at the University of Montana, and my team at NBC Montana. Lastly, I can't go without mentioning my grandfather. He was a TV meteorologist who also produced documentaries, including one on the first 50 years of television. That documentary not only featured Mr. Cronkite, but also Mr. Lear. My grandfather passed away last year, but I know this award and its many connections back to him is putting one heck of a smile on his face. Thank you so much for this incredible honor.
I had a chance to talk with Maritsa about covering the U.S. Postal Service mailbox removal that you can watch at cronkiteawards.org. Here's a clip from our conversation.
It first hit my radar from the office of Senator Jon Tester. His office sent out a release that just kind of mentioned reports. There was nothing, substantiated. There were no details. They said they've heard reports that this is happening and just in a couple towns in Montana. And he had preemptively written the Postmaster General to ask more questions about this. So we took that email from reports just in Montana, and it just kind of snowballed into this much larger thing. And, getting documents and getting confirmation from local postal union leaders. And we had no idea how big it was.
Right. And that's interesting. You mentioned the postal workers. It can be challenging to get government workers to talk to reporters. So can you talk a little bit about gaining the trust of postal workers?
Yeah, well, I really think it's time and time in your own communities. I really think this is a story that just is such a great example of why local news matters. You're in your community, you're building those relationships, and you're showing people that they can trust you with sensitive information and to not burn them, because they really put their lives on the line sending me some of these documents. And so I really think it's that time, and also just being engaged, and not just being engaged when you need something, but being engaged when you don't need something. That's a really important lesson I learned early on in my career. And so it was wonderful that they trusted me with this information. The funny thing is I had already set up an interview with one of the local Postal Service workers. We were going to start looking at delays and possible ramifications in Montana because of new policies that were being enacted, such as having trucks leave, even if all the mail wasn't collected, those kinds of things. And it was just perfect timing that this email came down from Senator Tester's office the night before I had already had that interview scheduled.
Interesting. Well, also the governor obviously got involved as well. Do you think that your reporting played a role in Governor Steve Bullock's decision to sue the Postmaster General?
Yeah, I do, mostly because they used my reporting as an example in the filing. And so, it was wonderful to see so many different things grow off of this first initial report. And we're still talking about it. There are still things I'm digging into on this because it was a really important issue for a lot of people and something that they could see and was tangible in front of them, not just something happening behind the scenes, but they could see the blue boxes and say, well, we don't want that to go away.
I'm Eugene Kiley, Director of factcheck.org at the University of Pennsylvania's Annenberg Public Policy Center. Since 2013, the Cronkite Awards have partnered with the Annenberg Public Policy Center to present the Brooks Jackson Prize. This award is named for the veteran journalist who pioneered long-form fact-checking of false and misleading political statements, and who co-founded factcheck.org with Kathleen Hall Jamieson. A special jury selected the winner. The 2021 Brooks Jackson Prize goes to Dr. Sanjay Gupta, CNN's chief medical correspondent, for his correction of COVID-19 misinformation. The jury praised Dr. Gupta as an important voice throughout the pandemic and in many formats. He delivered on-air fact-checking segments, participated in town halls, and hosted a COVID-19 podcast.
You know, I spent some of the evening yesterday sort of doing the math, really going through these studies, trying to figure out what he was talking about. And some of it still did not make sense. So, I called him. He and I talked for a while, really going through these numbers. And shortly after that, he put out this tweet, these series of tweets, basically clarifying what he said. And I think this is important because I think what people heard at the press conference on Sunday was, look, if 100 people take this treatment, 35 people would survive that otherwise wouldn't have survived. That's what people were sort of left with, and that certainly sounds pretty impressive. But that's not really what the study showed at all.
My grandma had COVID-19. Her doctor said she is immune to coronavirus for 1 to 3 years. Is that true?
First of all, I hope your grandma's doing better. I'm sure that was pretty scary. Truth is, your grandma should have some protection against the virus now. But we don't know how long or how strong that protection is. So in the meantime, everyone still has to be careful. Misconception number 3. You can only catch COVID-19 if you've been in close contact with someone who actually has symptoms. You remember that choir in Washington State? Out of 61 members, there was only one symptomatic person. After 2.5 hours of singing, 87% of the participants became infected. It was early evidence that the virus could spread not just through touch or through respiratory droplets, but through something known as aerosols. Think of those as suspended viral particles lingering in the air for a while and also traveling much farther than 6 feet.
The jury said Dr. Gupta has been a consistent and reliable messenger for accurate information. He delivers the facts clearly and states them with purpose and authority. Here is his acceptance speech.
First of all, just thank you so much. I must say that when you're reporting from a windowless basement for more than a year, it can feel like you're shouting into a void. But this honor, I think, is a reminder to all of us how incredibly important the work of journalists really is. You know, I came to journalism later than most, but even before I joined their ranks, I always had such great admiration for the role journalists play in our society. And that admiration has only grown for me. I mean, there's no question this has been a story unlike anything I've ever covered, and facts and data and evidence, they matter more than ever. Many people sometimes think that science is like math, that 2 + 2 is always going to equal 4. Truth is, science is more like art in some ways. It evolves and it changes, and we need to continuously learn more and more. So when it came to a novel virus, it presented a unique challenge where we needed to quickly follow the fast-moving data, and that required just constant homework. Every day was different. Nothing stayed the same. And that's a challenge sometimes when communicating to the public. We needed to tell viewers what we knew, but equally important, we needed to tell people what we couldn't say for sure, and we needed to do it honestly and with humility. Everyone from kids to adults, they had questions that they wanted answered. Maybe there were technical questions about how the virus actually infects our bodies, to just simple things like, is it safe to go to the grocery store? Can I hug my grandparents? While people may now know efficacy rate of the vaccine that they received. They may know what a monoclonal antibody treatment is. The fact is that people wanted to know how they could live their lives, how they could stay safe, and how they could move forward together. So I'm proud of the public service I think my team and I have been able to provide, and we are all so incredibly honored to receive this award.
My colleague, Kathleen Hall-Jamieson, director of the Annenberg Public Policy Center, had an opportunity to speak with Dr. Gupta about his work. You can see their full conversation at cronkiteawards.org. Here's a clip.
That's the precautionary principle. Should we just say at that point, hey, this could be happening, let's wear masks until we get control of this thing, and then sort of figure it out? Yeah, we would be in a much different place by now. If I was the one telling people to wear masks in late January, early February, maybe nobody would have listened to me, but I think that would have been the right call.
And what about aerosolized transmission? Did we get the warnings out quickly enough about aerosolized transmission, or could a scientist reasonably, exercising the precautionary principle, have said, let's assume aerosolized transmission, even if we're not completely sure, let's assume it and act as if that's happening as well?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, it does become a question of what is the level of evidence you need to say that you're going to make a recommendation. And this will always be the question. And you'll have to recognize that we're never going to have 100% certainty on these things. When we started to see evidence of people who were becoming infected, who really did not live with somebody who was infected, seemed to have no contact, direct contact with people who were infected, that was probably a very good clue that transmission was happening in different ways. It took a lot of people, beating the drum on this for some time, showing their models over and over again to basically say, hey, look, we keep talking about respiratory droplets, very important, 6 feet away, that's enough to prevent transfer through respiratory droplets. But the idea that it could spread through an entire house or an entire restaurant or whatever it may be, it just took a long time to get there, to prove that. What do you do in that interim period before you can prove something? We deal with this in medicine all the time. We don't always have to wait to prove that opening someone's carotid artery in someone who's had a stroke would probably restore blood flow to the brain. Do we need a trial of 100,000 people to say that? Or can we realistically sort of predict that would be beneficial to restore blood flow? It's that level of evidence that you have to sort of think about. What is required to make recommendations, and what are we asking people to do? If you're asking people to wear a mask, it's not like you're necessarily asking them to turn their lives upside down. You're not asking them to stop doing things. Just wear a mask when you're out in public.
Dr. Gupta, thank you for asking such important questions and answering them so well. And thank you for all that you've done to incorporate a new model of fact-checking into journalism by combining the preemptive knowledge of a doctor and a medical expert with an understanding of what the deceptions are, how people are susceptible to them, and how you can explain to them in English that everybody can understand why it is that science knows what it knows when it knows it. Congratulations on receiving this award. We're so very proud to have you in our list of honorees across time, winning the Brooks Jackson Fact-Checking Award.
Oh, well, I'm really honored. I will really treasure this. I appreciate this conversation. And, this is, hopefully this will inspire people to keep doing the good work.
Thank you, Dr. Gupta and Professor Jamieson. And thanks to all our winners and presenters, and to our screeners and judges. And special thanks to my Lear Center colleague, Veronica Haggerty, who managed the competition and this production. At the top of the program, we had a minute with Norman Lear. Now that he's seen the awards, let's check in with him again. Norman, what did you think?
I couldn't be prouder, Marty. I think it was fabulous. And these people, the winners, the people who contributed in every sense were, I couldn't be more grateful or proud.
Well, they all expressed their admiration for you for starting the Lear Center and enabling the Walter Cronkite Awards to happen.
Well, dare I say that the idea for the Lear Center came from Marty Kaplan and his and my good friend, Jeff Cowan.
We showed a photo of Jeff Cowan with Katharine Graham on his arm at the beginning of the show. So that proves his parentage of the thing.
Well, I could not be more grateful to both of you guys for the idea, and nor could I be more proud of everything that has followed.
So, Norman, I have to confess that when I was talking to the winners of the various awards, we inevitably talked about you, and I mentioned that you were about to begin your 100th year. And they were all very interested in this. And I would like to show you what their reaction was. Would you look at your screen?
I'm looking at it now. I'd love to see that.
My name is Jelani Cobb. I'm a staff writer at The New Yorker, and I am happy to wish Norman Lear a happy 99th birthday.
Norman, this is Judd Slivka from 12 News, KPNX in Phoenix, and I'm honored and flattered to be able to wish you a very happy birthday.
Norman, David Culver here from CNN in Shanghai, wishing you a very happy birthday. Feliz cumpleaños.
Norman, a very happy birthday to you. You know, we've met before. You'll never remember it. It was back in 1986 at Syracuse University, and you told a very impressionable Syracuse University junior some important advice. You said, kid, write, and then write some more. Well, I'm still trying my best, Norman. Happy birthday.
Norman, it's my honor to wish you a happy birthday. You're just a giant in broadcasting and storytelling and television. All in the Family was a fixture in my family growing up. And for that creation and that reason and so many others, we're all here to celebrate and wish you just a happy, happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Norman.
Happy birthday.
I'm Maritsa, Georgiou with NBC Montana, and I want to wish Norman Lear a very happy 99th birthday. Unbelievable. Go celebrate.
Happy birthday, Mr. Lear. It's such a privilege to know you and to be able to wish you a happy birthday. You really inspire all of us and set an example that we can all aspire to. Happy birthday, sir.
Marty, I could not be more touched. That was so delicious. Thank you, and thank you all. I wish you great lives, you young greats.
We all love you and are looking forward to the 100th and beyond.
I look forward to all of that, especially the beyond.